Welcome to DEIJB Conversations. I'm Reverend Jackie Fernandez, and it's always such an honor to gather for these conversations. Month after month, we meet on the second Thursdays and fourth Thursdays of each month, our second Thursday being recorded as we're doing today. However, for November and December, the fourth Thursdays are on holidays, so we won't be having the discussion portion of our monthly routine, but we'll start back up in January with that. So hopefully if you're watching the recording, that you'll get something out of this that you can use through the holidays and then join us back after the first of the year. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Let's see if this does it right. Out of the way. There we go. See my PowerPoint? And is it big enough that you can? Okay. Awesome. So today our topic is White Santa meets Black Jesus at La Posada. And we'll be covering all of the various holidays that happen over the end of the year, which some of them are already starting this month. So we just want to, really talk about the opportunities available to us in ministry for holidays. We often come through this season very focused on our Christian roots through Advent and of course, Christmas Eve services. And then we have our unity traditions with burning bowl and white stone. And many of us do some kind of service. We call ours a healing light. I've heard them called also blue light or blue healing, where it's a time to hold space for those who are grieving through the holidays or experiencing anything less than merriment and joy. So I want to, bring also into this the awareness and opportunities of how to really focus on the aspect of diversity from the lens of belonging and how the holidays, really create an opportunity for us to experience belonging. And so it's not just the theology of it. And I know year after year, we're always looking for a new way to approach, these same old stories and aspects. So hopefully there'll be something in that for you. Hi, Ariana. So good to see you. I got halfway through the study in the storm yesterday. So I feel like I
Hey.
spent some time with you, but it's good to have you live.
Thank
Here
you.
we
Glad to
go.
be here. I'm sorry I came in under
Yeah.
the region. I didn't remember to
Oh,
change my stuff, so
that's okay. That's
I'm
okay.
just gonna hang.
That happens to me too. So. All right, so you're right on time. We're gonna just go ahead and dive in. And so, at the heart of the holidays, we honor tradition. This is the time, we are really grow into the rhythm of what the holidays are. And we have family traditions, some that are generational, some that are new. But we really rely on the rituals and traditions that we hold in the holidays, and especially because it's often tied to food and the experience of giving and generosity and receiving. But we also, at the heart of the holidays, is an opportunity to support well-being and to build inclusive community. So typically attendance goes up in our spiritual communities, and often with that as well, needs go up because of financial stress. If you're in a part of the country where the weather gets cold, then there might be, more stress on the houseless communities, and of course those who are in need of who experience food insecurity. So, and with generosity open and hearts open, we often also get more participation in those opportunities to give and support. So there's a lot that's happening, that we don't often think of initially when we talk about Christmas tradition. Our food drives, our winter coat drives, those kinds of things as well. So all of that, though, the givingness, the openness, the coming together in tradition and ritual is really at the heart of the holidays. And so I've just listed a few because there are so many of the various holidays that happen, at the end of the year. Christmas, of course, Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, the winter and summer solstice, depending on which hemisphere you're in. If you're in Australia, it'll be the summer solstice that's coming up on December 21st. We have New Year's Eve, New Year's Day, Bodhi Day, which is for Buddhism, Omisoka, which is Japanese, Yule, Epiphany, and there are more. Is there anything that you all celebrate that's not on this list? or have celebrated? All right. So we started with the heart of the holidays. There's also the heartbreak of the holidays. Seasonal depression, again, for those who are living in, the colder wintry type places, disrupted traditions, disrupted finances, disrupted health, grief, these things that often, if the heart is already in a tender space or if there's already, financial problems, all of this is heightened. In our stress level through the holidays because of the traditions, that are sort of baked into this time, because there's more pressure to come together with family, and maybe family is not really a safe place or a peaceful place. Um, so in ministry, we also have that. We've got the heart of the holidays and wanting to capture the joy and to be in the joy of everything, but then also to be present to what's happening in the heartbreak of the holidays. And mental health, is such a huge, huge, huge experience, especially in the United States. And so I think it's just so important for us to really bring that into our knowing as spiritual leaders, and to be able to know, how to really keep an eye on our people, and to also empower people to keep an eye on each other. We know suicide rates go up. We know there's a mass exodus from this life to crossing the veil. Through all demographics of people at this time of year. So, common stressors, of course, we know these: financial pressure, grief again, or loneliness, family conflicts, world and community issues, especially this year, all of that is very heightened. Then, of course, the emotional highs and lows of it, just going through all the joyful connections. But again, if your family is, if there's any kind of conflict, or whether it's longstanding or new, and especially right now, people are so politically divided even in their families. We've talked about it in this group, and it's really rampant across the country. Heightened anxiety and depression, seasonal affective disorder. So really being mindful that we are updating our resources, of connecting people to mental health resources, knowing what's available, especially during the holiday season for our community members, is going to be a really important thing. Making sure your prayer chaplains have their resource lists updated, so that when they're making those prayer calls, that they're able to offer any resources, and or to be trained to come back to you with, hey, I feel like I heard something a little different in this prayer call, and maybe this person needs a ministerial check-in, that kind of thing, so that we're really taking care of each other during this time. And so here we are, the ministerial opportunities, recognizing signs of distress, and we got to include ourselves in that. Recognizing our own signs of distress, right? Remembering to put on our own oxygen mask before we help and support others, so that, making sure that our spiritual practices are, that we're utilizing them, that we are utilizing our own tools. And, if you need to make an appointment with your own therapist or mentor or someone, to really make sure that you're having um, that you are supported during this time as well. And it's so easy for us to just put it off till January, because there's so much for us to do in this time. But we've really got to preload before we come into the holiday seasons, take our vitamins, hydrate, hydrate, hydrate. I've got my water right here, and I'm already, been hearing myself today a little dehydrated, so I'm going to take a sip. We should start scheduling water breaks as part of our ritual. Offering support and spiritual grounding during this complex time. What are you doing in your Sunday services, or in any extra services that you have? What are you offering through your newsletter or through your social media, by way of really helping people to have tools to stay grounded, and to openly acknowledge that this is a complex time, that you can be fully into the holiday spirit and fully, experiencing stress or depression or grief or anger, hopelessness. I, heard from someone yesterday just saying, I'm having a hard time holding on to hope. Um, So even if we aren't hearing those words directly, just knowing that it's in the air right now, that we can be offering tools for people, and they will feel seen by that. Creating space for both the expression of grief and anything that is less than joyful. That our Sunday best is not masking with a smile and putting on our best outfits. Our Sunday best can be authenticity. That I'm coming into this spiritual space with my grief, and I'm welcome here and I'm seen here, even if the Advent calendar says this Sunday is all about joy or all about peace, and I'm not feeling peace. That you are welcome here in whatever you're feeling, and then hopefully you're leaving with that feeling of joy or peace, or at least with a tool and an understanding and acceptance of where you are right now. And the more we can just really be honest with our language, the more permission we give for people to be just as they are in our space. And they will come more often if they can experience that. And we want to create traditions and rituals within our spiritual communities, especially because we're knowing that some people, I'm going to admit someone right now, that some people are missing that. They've lost their loved ones, or family members have moved away, or somehow they're separated, whether it's by death or emotional distance. That we have an opportunity in our spiritual communities to have just small traditions and rituals that we do, and that kind of replaces that for people. And it gives them that sense of, I can come here. A few years ago, Christmas morning, Christmas Day was on Sunday morning. And so we didn't hold a service. We had our Christmas Eve service Saturday night, but Sunday morning, myself and our associate minister came in and we made pancakes. And I had the music director come in without the band. Whoever, needed somewhere to be on Christmas morning was welcome. And we had maybe 12 people, but we stood around the piano and sang Christmas carols. We ate pancakes. And for those 12 people, it was everything. It was their Christmas. And so to really just look for those opportunities to be present with people in ways that are really meaningful. Welcome in, Lisa. And so then we come to the gift of really being intentional about how we bring diversity, equity, inclusivity, justice, and belonging. There is the justice of simply seeing people in their complexity, that you can be in your joy and in your grief at the same time. And there's, an emotional justice, a spiritual justice in that you get to be just as you are and who you are in this space. We build a sense of belonging and radical oneness by doing that. We also expand, respect through diversity, respect for a variety of traditions, which reduces fear and increases connection. And we need that right now more than ever. Like, just bring the walls down. Let's get familiar with saying, the names of other traditions or other holidays. Hanukkah. Can everyone in your community say the word Hanukkah? Can everyone, identify what Bodhi Day is or what Kwanzaa is? And not that we want it to be like sort of a mental game of knowledge, but it's about familiarity with other traditions, which brings familiarity with other people, people that might otherwise be identified as strangers or foreigners or outsiders, that it really just brings that closeness in. And it doesn't, have to be extensive or exhaustive even. It can just be, which I feel like a broken record in this, but I'm going to keep on this skipped beat, that even if you just do something small, it's the consistency of it over time that builds our collective awareness. Because if I can get used to saying, words that are foreign to me, then I can get used to being in discomfort. And if I can be used to being in discomfort, then I can get used to being around people who are very different from me. And all of a sudden, the world starts becoming a safer place, and I move, more confidently through it. And we begin to build up that competency, which leads to that experience of radical oneness. We align with our spiritual principle of inclusivity, honoring the divine in all by honoring and giving dignity to other faith practices and traditions. And it also, we help to prevent unintentional harm through exclusionary practices by, leaving someone out who has, maybe a tradition, maybe you have someone who is a practicing Jew in your community. and you don't even acknowledge Hanukkah, which is, hugely celebrated in this country. So, there are different ways to give the note, to give the experience of all are welcome here, really making that phrase come alive. And so I want to talk about the impact of representation, which, the title for today is, White Santa meets Black Jesus at Las Posadas. And it's like to bring in just all of those like images that we have around the holiday. Of course, the White Santa originates from European traditions and was popularized by Coca-Cola in the 1930s ad campaign. Many people have, they collect the Coca-Cola Santa, items. And that really solidified the image of Santa as an older white man in a red suit. That's where that picture comes from. And it unintentionally then reinforces Eurocentric norms, excluding people of diverse racial and cultural identities. Historically, Jesus, likewise, has been depicted in art as white. Liberation and justice theology has emphasized an image of a Black Jesus, creating hope and identification for all marginalized communities and challenging those dominant narratives. So let's look at how are we presenting Jesus? How are we presenting Santa? How are we even giving picture and language to the holiday experience? Are we bringing diverse voices and images into that? So we always want to check our own bias and the bias of our team, maybe whoever your social media team is or whoever's creating your PowerPoints, that we're watching for that, that let's like allow this opportunity to show a picture of a Black Santa or a Chinese Santa. Those images are available, or multiple Santas, trading it out so that it really bucks the norm and it gives us pause, in the things that we just sort of assume. And likewise with Jesus, I think in Unity we have a lot of comfort around talking about, Jesus was not white or European. And because we have that comfort, we might not do it as often as really could be effective for people, especially in our congregations for people of color. Um, it can really be meaningful to see those images subverted. So representation shapes perceptions of who belongs and whose stories are valued. And those are big words, easy sentence to read, but really shaping the perception. And that's what we do when we teach about spiritual ideas and concepts. The images that we use, the voices that we use, the luminaries that we quote, all of that feeds into how we shape the experience, the actual spiritual experience. I've noticed that, so this is my 6th fall faith since I've been here, and only one of the books that we've used was authored by a woman. And for me personally, in the early years, it was important because I thought I was balancing my voice. Because we've got the female perspective here, sort of non-binary-ish perspective here. But so if we get an author, with a male voice, then we've got kind of a balance. And someone said to me, we got a lot of years to go to create balance in the big picture. Like you could have a book by women every year for 20 years and still not have created any kind of balance in that. And I was like, oh, that's a really good point. So this year was very intentional to make sure we picked a book by a woman of color, and we did See No Stranger by Valerie Kaur. I have used other, it's not just been white men, it's been queer, white men, or it's been Latino men. So I've, looked for diversity in other ways. But, who are we quoting? And is it always, the Hebrew scriptures or Christian scriptures? Are we also pulling in the Buddha voice and like those luminaries, but also what other spiritual leaders are we quoting? And we have so many in Unity. Our books are by and large written by white voices, but there are so many people of color in Unity who preach every week, who write articles. Those wonderful booklets we get from Unity, they're very good about having a lot of diverse voices represented there, that we can start pulling, so that we're getting even our own Unity story through diverse voices. When we tell stories, if you have like a little antidote that you want to share, Karen, you shared a wonderful one with me that really dove into some deep stuff, cross-cultural and xenophobia, all of that stuff, gun violence. When we're bringing anecdotes in, are we making sure that there is representation? If we're even just using a story about a mom and a dad, well, could it be two dads or two moms in this story? Like, just even though that's not what the story is, not about a gay couple, maybe it's about the child, but can this child in this story have gay parents? And so that we're, again, just normalizing that there are all kinds of family structures, or can the family live in a multi-generational home, so like really just checking our biases. And it might take a little extra time, but the impact will be well worth it, because so many more people will feel included. And back to my sort of broken recordness of, like, it's about the consistency, because you can't speak to every possible family dynamic, but just the fact that you're breaking away from the norm, mom, dad, 2.5 kids with a white picket fence and a dog named Spot, just because you simply have broken out of that. Maybe there's a deaf parent in your story. Um, More people will see themselves in the story because it simply breaks the norm. And so over time, when you've varied your words and your quotes and your images, the stories that show up in your newsletters, the stories you use in your talks, over time, you have varied it so much that eventually everyone sees themselves in the work that we're doing together. So, really want to let yourself off the hook of trying to cover every possible thing. You don't have to name every single holiday that's about the light and celebrating the light in December. You can just name one other one besides Christmas, or two, and it still has a major impact and effect. So go easy on yourself, be gentle with yourself as well. So I always want to give you some resources and action steps. And, so to educate yourself about various holidays and traditions, what's your comfort level with naming, two or three other traditions that happen during December or January? And just, reviewing that and renewing that for yourself. Avoiding appropriation, we always want to do that, but also, engage celebration and honoring. So we're celebrating and honoring other traditions without just stealing it and leaving those voices out. It's a great time to invite a guest speaker in, even if they just give, a 5-minute sort of testimony of what it's like to be someone who doesn't celebrate Christmas in a society that does, and just to share that. And so the more we can give space for stories, the greater impact we have to cultivating diversity and inclusivity in our communities. We want to acknowledge and incorporate diverse celebrations and customs in our services and programs, again, even if it's not the main focus. And using the inclusive language in talks and newsletters, social media, and we cover that throughout the year. So hopefully now it's an opportunity to bring all of that forward into our biggest time of the year, when people are really paying attention to what's happening in our spiritual centers. We want to offer those mental health resources and create space for those who are struggling. And again, foster dialogues about inclusivity within your congregation and leadership. All of this to normalize the acknowledgement and celebration of diversity. Right? These are all of the ways that we're doing that. We're just, again, just normalizing that we can talk about any faith practice here, and it doesn't threaten our unity teachings, doesn't threaten our traditions. We can still just go forward with our burning bowl and the way that we do our burning bowl. But because we talked about Kwanzaa or brought in, some of the spiritual teachings from Kwanzaa, does nothing to threaten us. In fact, it can support us and bring us into that global world conversation and experience. My favorite thing to do is, at the end of the day, none of us can prove anything that we're talking about, and none of us know. We're all just making it up with language and imagery and stories that work in our, culture of origin. And so it's a way to, like, honor that, and also then, well, what are your stories, and how have you come to this tradition, and create that true sense and experience of living oneness rather than just talking about it. And here's an example, and you're welcome to use this. Again, I'll send my PowerPoint to Elaine, and she'll post it on the USCR website. But this is an example of a social media post that we put up for Unity Church of Overland Park. So faith traditions impart sacred customs, rituals, and stories across generations. And then on the left, you'll see the caption, faith traditions and spiritual practices serve as a bridge uniting us with our ancestors. These customs connect us deeply with shared beliefs and rituals that shape our values and identities. Through ancient practices, we stay connected to our sacred roots. I mean, that's a great conversation starter. I mean, that you can use that any time of the year, right? But it links, we all have connection to our ancestors. We all have connection to ritual, to identity, to values, and to really look at the faith traditions as a beacon of that and how we can really relate to each other rather than differentiate from each other, you know. So it's really just another way to bring that competency into your community and to demonstrate that. All right, we have some time, so just like to open if there's anything you want to go back, what's this stirring up in you? What opportunities are you looking at in your communities as we fastly approach the holidays?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So it's always the question of appropriation is always
Mhm.
one for me
Yeah.
because I work so much across faiths.
Hmm.
And where I've kind of settled is in that place of giving credit and speaking to point of origin and all of that. Um, and also to obviously to involving other people who actually are from that
Hmm.
particular wherever whatever that point of origin is. But I still find it a mushy line.
Yeah.
It's still a mushy line for me. Like when I try and define appropriation, I said to someone recently, the lines on the earth are not real. They're not real. So who are we appropriating from? Because
Yeah.
we all live on the planet.
Yeah.
And how, there's when you start studying these traditions, there's so many similarities across so many different faiths that
Hmm.
sometimes it's even hard to get down to whether you actually have the point of origin. So I just wonder if,
Yes.
if you have deeper study in that area or if
Mhm.
there's stuff you would like to add to that conversation.
Well, I think, you know, what you said there about whether you've even reached the point of origin. You know, it's like you can chase your own tail, right? You know, which story came first, which tradition came first, and who's verifying that, you know, because, you know, history is told through, you know, the winners of wars. And so I love too that you like the planet has no lines, no borders, no boundaries. And if you're trying to approach it through, like, let's say, you know, because it's such a good relatable example, a Mexican tradition versus a Native American tradition, how are you separating the two? Like, because that's a fake border. And the tribes, you know, were one nation which crossed that border and worked together, traveled, traded, shared stories, shared traditions. So how are you to, you know, how are you to know? So what I teach is that we do it honestly and authentically. So if you're honestly wanting to learn what you can about X, Y, or Z and to honor it and celebrate it and introduce it to your community, you know, the first opportunity is, you know, who can you talk to that that tradition is authentic to and lived, you know, that has come up in that tradition. Um, and can that voice be brought into your community either by a statement or would they be willing to come in and speak so that it's not translated through your voice? And that's not always practical. You know, if you live in a space where, or in a location where there's not a lot of diversity available to you, or it comes up at the last minute and it's going to be so perfect and there's just not time or practicality for bringing someone in. Again, it comes back to the authenticity and your honesty about that and to say, you know, we're not doing this um, to appropriate. We're doing this to practice and to try it on and to honor. And so what might it feel like, you know, to practice this, whatever it is? whether it's a specific ceremony or a thought, or, a principle, a precept, whatever you want to say it, and to work with it and honor it. And I think that's enough. Like that's the best we can do. And if someone is offended or, I mean, give me a Sunday where you're not offending someone and you're being a lazy minister. Like, you know. Um, so I think it's a great question, and I think that if you're feeling frustrated, then you're probably doing it right. If it's hard and frustrating, then you're probably doing it right. If you
Yeah.
feel really good about what you're doing, then you're probably missing something.
I This came up recently around Day of the Dead and the ofrenda, and a young lady who spoke to me about her discomfort with the fact that other people take from her history.
Yeah.
And we had a long conversation about Europeans and how we left our traditions behind, and
Hmm.
how important it is that those of us with European descent are coming back to some of these experiences that enrich life and bring us back to our ancestors, and deepen relationship and understanding across borders and all of that. But it was really, I was really honored that she felt safe enough to say, I'm struggling with this.
Yeah,
I think that's always an important
absolutely.
thing to keep, to question ourselves about when we're in our spiritual environment. If someone was uncomfortable, could they come forward and talk
Mhm.
to you?
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. That's it right there. If someone can come forward and say, I did not appreciate that, that didn't work for me, it didn't land with me, and to be able to receive that and to
Mhm.
come to an understanding with it, and it still doesn't make you wrong. And that one voice doesn't represent all voices for that community. There's diversity within communities, and so I think that's really important too. I cringe so hard when people paint their faces like the Katrinas, for Day of the Dead, because it's not a Halloween costume. But if someone is painting their face and they understand that and they're doing it in celebration of Day of the Dead, then I don't have that same cringe factor, but I feel like I can tell. And it's none of that person's business how I feel about it. You know what I mean? That's my feeling and for me to address. Now, in a spiritual space, we want people, if anything comes up for them, to be able to share that and express that because it, brings us all closer together. And we can't just walk on eggshells for every single thing. Karen.
Um, this is such a great conversation. The thought occurs to me, and it's never occurred to me before, that in using as illustration another tradition, or telling a story or whatever, if I what I could have done when I was serving in a ministry that I never thought of, actually, which is to have the church give a donation to that community or to
Hmm.
an effort that supports that community, and let that be known, that in
Yeah.
gratitude, the whole practice of reciprocity, of saying
Yes.
we have borrowed some wisdom from another
Hmm.
tradition, and in exchange we are ooh, I just felt a bunch of
Yeah.
chills. I was like, yeah, I know, I missed out. I didn't think of it. So,
Ah. And you're
so
sharing it
anyway,
now. Yeah.
and I'm sharing it now, and I'm and
Hmm.
I'm hoping to carry it forward in seeing how we could do that.
Hmm.
And how we teach. What think of the teaching that would just emanate from that example, over and over again,
And
and
especially if you're able to do that locally, then you're making a relational impact with whoever you're giving that gift to. And how
e-
powerful
ex-
is that?
exactly right. That's
Yeah.
so true.
Hmm. That's beautiful. Deva.
I don't know how to formulate a question or a comment, but what I'm aware of is some deep discomfort that's coming up for me that's personal. And that is that my mother's father was Cherokee, and he was not raised in tradition. He preferred to pass as Black. He didn't look Black, but he moved from St. Mary's, Georgia to DC. and the Black community is very large, has been very large there for a long time. And so that's where he found a place of belonging. And I never knew him. He died a hit and run when I was 17 months old, I think. But my mom went through being called a half-breed or a squaw, which we now know is a horrible word for a woman. And so I used to appropriate different traditions that I learned, read books, etc., go to a couple of ceremonies, etc. And then I got really uncomfortable with the appropriation issue. And so that's coming up for me now. And I wonder if you could say something more about that practice and try it on that you mentioned a little while ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so powerful. Thank you for sharing that. Um, when I was teaching at UWSI, I taught the basically everything but Sunday class, like in terms of ritual and ceremony. And I always started it with a lot of with a session on cultural appropriation. And one thing that came out of the conversation that I'll never forget with one class, and that you're reminding me of it then, is someone who said, my great 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 grandmother was, a tribe from a tribal a Native American, and it's like, and this very same thing, I felt uncomfortable, and my question is, if you go back to that great great, so in your case it's your grandfather or great grandfather, from his perspective, looking down the generations that are coming after him, when is it okay with him that you let go of his identity?
Let go of his identity.
Yeah, so,
That's an interesting
and
question
ask it
because
for yourself, like, right, like,
he tried to let go of that identity. So
yeah,
so
that's so then maybe his parents, like it, right, and so, and he did it to fit in, right, to find acceptance,
to belong. Yeah.
yeah, to have a measure of success in life, right, to belong. And so, I think there's something deeply important about recovering what has been lost
Ooh,
because of the way people have behaved.
ooh, that gave me cellular shift.
Yeah.
Ah, thank you.
So, and to do that, again, coming back honestly and authentically, then this is not about appropriation. This is about recovery of tradition, recovery of identity, recovery, connection with your ancestors, and what might come through you, and who might you be with your great grandmother's arms wrapped all the way around you. I think it can't be a one-sided conversation. And I will say this too, that often my experience has been that those lines of what's appropriate and what identifies come from white voices. And I have been told by a white-bodied person, well, you're white because Latinos are white. I'm like, yeah, but who decided that? White people. And they decided it because of the census that they wanted more white people. And so they called the Latinos, you're going to check the box white as race so that the blacks are over there and all of us white, it is deeply disturbing, you know, to have to do that. So I think what we really have to turn to is our wisdom, capital W wisdom, about life, about tradition, about what moves through people. And I think as spiritual leaders, we are uniquely positioned to have these conversations and to go through these experiences because we are trained to be in that, right? In the wisdom of things. And so to have, and that's really like really at the core of why I do this work is when I use words like to raise our competency, our collective competency around these conversations. Let the words be comfortable. But that's what it all comes back to me is that radical belonging, that radical oneness, is because we are one. So whatever your tradition is also mine. And we must do it with respect and with care so that we aren't then offending or hurting other people, or in the instances of so racism. So like a really good example is when a white person grows dreadlocks, they still have white privilege. When a black person grows dreadlocks, they're, they fall further down the pile of resumes that might get hired after, so to have the awareness of what your privilege is, which is why we talk about privilege, and how that impacts everything you do, which brings us back to do it honestly and do it authentically, right? But to your question, and I would love to open, Ariana, I'm really curious what you think about that. Um, because you have broken away, or because you don't look, like what your heritage is, because you don't have the tradition, because you weren't raised on a reservation, talk to your great 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 grandmother.
Yeah,
And see what she might
absolutely.
say. See what she might say.
There's that very sweet thing about unity, that is that we know how to go into the oneness,
Yeah.
allows us to reach into those ancestral knowings, and that it feels so important, that piece of, we're in oneness, we are one. So that's across time, across dimension, across everything. And being able to create space to go and talk to her, I think, is such a good idea. Just a sacred space that you meditate into, and let her come with what she thinks you need to know. I think for so many of us who are white bodied, to recognize what was lost when we started moving out across the world, to realize what we've left behind, what we don't understand, and then to recognize that we're epigenetically influenced by 4,000 people across 11 generations. We are carrying in this little body of ours the epigenetic signatures of 4,000 ancestors. And to try and just look at that and even imagine for a moment that you haven't crossed most cultures is naive. So there's so much available for us, I think, just as we get to know ourselves better and sit in the awareness that there is ancestral impression within us.
And then to be aware and have the, compassion to know that, so many people who are not white-bodied have been, their traditions have been ripped from them, stolen from them, erased, and or used against them. And so to come into a white space and see something being celebrated that you have experienced oppression for, there's a big disconnect with that. Um, but to come into a white space and see it done well, and to maybe see someone who looks like you or is from that tradition, having place and voice, being centered. So, it's about, what voice are we centering? But I just think it's so important for all of us to connect, to our lineage, and to allow whatever will be spoken through us to be spoken through us. That, to me, that's our path to recovery.
I think, Jackie, one of the really hard things about people in the white culture is that there's an assumption that we can just step back and find our lineage,
Hmm.
and it's not there.
Right.
People left their countries of origin and they didn't keep track of who the great great grandparents were, who came before that, what were the family traditions, all of that. They came here to do new land, new place, new whatever.
Hmm.
And so even traveling back, which I've been lucky to be able to do, it's difficult to find roots. It's
Hmm.
really difficult to find pieces that you can hold on to. And I think that's why so many white-bodied people really enjoy the deeper traditions of other cultures, because there's history about it. You can
Right.
find out what it means and
Hmm.
what was practiced and where it originated from and all of that.
Hmm.
And I think we all want to have our roots.
Yeah, for sure. I was in Peru last year, And the shaman that I was speaking to were talking about how their younger generations don't want to learn the language, the Quechua language. They're not interested in the practices. They want to be in the cities. They want to work. They want to be Western. And so they were like, you know, teaching me the lineage, like the 7 initiations, and they're like, use this, keep it alive. Like we welcome people who want to come in and learn it to keep it alive in the world. I also was at Yellowstone last year, and there was a beautiful man, I'm not going to recall his name right now, from a local tribe and reservation who was there, and he did, drumming with us and a teaching, and part of his teaching was, hold these stories in your heart and share them. And so I think, that if we are again showing up honestly and authentically, that, to your point, Ariana, if your ancestors showed up here to a new land, you're here now. you know maybe this is the lineage that you can trace, is that, how did your ancestors get here to this land, and who are you going to be here? You're not going to be the colonizer. Hopefully that's your answer, right? And then you're going to make peace with the teachings that are here. You're going to embrace the traditions that are here. And I think I think in our collective evolution, you know, that we've had to go through the heightened awareness of cultural appropriation, like to learn what's wrong with just stealing that, and still leaving the people, whose traditions you think are so wonderful, is still leaving them in poverty, and legislating them into poverty. Um, can we come to a place where we truly see each other? And can it be through the gifts of tradition and ways of living and sharing wisdom? Can we awaken to, oh, therefore our legislation should reflect this shared wisdom. Our legislation should reflect, that we need each other, you know. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there. That's why I say I think it is the path to our recovery.
I'd like to thank all of you for this. I didn't realize the burden was still so
Yeah.
heavy. And I also want to share my great grandmother's name. It was translated to Amber Reed. And that has all, and I'm an artist, so the
Yeah.
image has always been really powerful. So I'll welcome her. Thank you so
Oh,
very much.
yes. Thank you for sharing that, Deva. Amber Reed. Beautiful. What else? Karen.
A small observation, actually, that I hadn't thought of in this way is that when you were saying, as we introduce or include different traditions and speak those unfamiliar words sometimes, and the pronunciations, it never occurred to me to ask everyone to speak that, to pronounce those words. And the power of that just just fell into a slot in my mind, because I've been so disturbed by um, the things that are changing in this country, along with so much overturning and regression back to other times, is that normalization of mispronouncing people's names and the things that do that purpose. It appears to be very purposeful. Sure, there's lots of intention behind it, but that's what I sense, at least. But it feels to me that, like, it's of course, discounting a whole people. I mean, all of the damage that's done, and isolating and othering and all of that in just one simple step of of dishonoring, and the practice of actually speaking. And I don't want to correct anybody who mispronounces, because I live in South Texas. So that everything is named, It used to be Mexico, frankly. Everybody would just wake up and remember that. And all of the words that we use on places for names of places are actually Spanish words, but they're Americanized and slurred and all kinds of mispronounced, and letters are in it that don't exist. And it's frustrating for me because I've learned the language and I've really enjoyed speaking it. To me, it's beautiful and it's honoring. And yet, I'm always straddling, well, yeah, we call it Refugio. That's because that's how people know where to find it on the map. I mean, even
Yeah.
though it's not pronounced,
Yeah.
it's not spelled any way like that.
Yeah.
But but actually encouraging people to speak the word, helps. I think it gives everyone courage to at least attempt to speak names they don't know, that are don't from every tradition and from every person that they encounter, and to honor in a different way. And um, I still struggle with that, but I hear how you using those traditions and words and inviting the congregation to say it to the best of
Yeah.
their ability too
Yeah.
loosens everybody up to knowing that you don't have to do it perfectly, but your attempt is valuable.
100%. Yeah, we did that with the See No Stranger because, Valerie Kaur is spelled Kaur. It's core, not cower, but it looks like cower. And even for me, so on the first Sunday, I like, let's practice. Let's say it together. Core, core, core. And sure enough, the next week I came in and said in Valerie Cower's book, I had been practicing for months.
I know.
I've been listening to it, and all this. And I just, in that moment, I just corrected myself and moved on because I also wanted to model that we don't, it's the same with pronouns. You don't have to, oh, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I just correct yourself when you realize it and keep moving. Because I feel confident that if Miss Cora was sitting in the room, she's heard it wrong so many times. It's, like just the effort. And again, there's also the other side of inviting people to get comfortable being uncomfortable. Because how will we ever try? If we can't just, oh, I'm uncomfortable, but I'm going to do this. I'm going to try it. And I might fail miserably or get it right once and wrong 3 times, you know. But just to like, it's okay for us to do that. We can do that. We can do those hard things. If you can operate a smartphone, you can try to say this new word. Like, yeah. Anything else?
That I
Goodness.
appreciated that last piece because my heritage by going by my brother's DNA is almost all in the British Isles. There's like 2% that might be Norse, so there might be a little Viking in there. I don't know, but apparently we haven't mixed it up much along the way, and we're so very in that. But so I have really have an affinity for the ancient Celtic traditions, but I can't say Gaelic words. I went to Ireland and I was like, oh my God, I didn't even know that's how you say that. Everything sounds so different,
Yeah.
But just to try it on and learn it and share that with other people, and along those lines, I've gotten real comfortable presenting like the rituals around the calendar, because that fits with my culture.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
It is. And there's also like those traditions and practices that are closer to the earth, that are based on the cycles of the earth, are so relatable. Like, like and it helps people actually ground into their bodies. Like the reason we talk about the light in the winter, especially with daylight savings, is because there's so much darkness out there. So we want to be the light, and it's rich spiritual metaphor, and it can help us get through all of the heartbreak, of the holidays, but also then the rest of the year we've had this concentrated time of practicing being the light and bringing light into the darkness, and that when it happens outside of the winter months, we've got that practice in our bones and are able to do it. So Yeah, I think it's so powerful to, in a way, we're returning people home to themselves, to their body temples, to the planet, to the earth, and to each other. So go bravely into the holiday season. Go comfortably uncomfortable into the holiday season. And I do wish you all the very best. I'm so grateful for this group, for those of you who have shown up, for those of you who are watching the recording, and that we're willing to do this work because it's not easy work. It is not. And we got to do it. So I so appreciate your bravery, your courage, your love, your authenticity, and your honesty. And I appreciate you. All right, so have a happy Thanksgiving. We won't meet on the fourth Thursday, but I'll see you back in December. I love you.